A viral video showing dozens of local TV anchors across the country reciting the same script addressing fake news has triggered major criticism. Sinclair Broadcast Group is the country's largest owner of TV stations. Its chairman, David Smith, told the New York Times it was a standard practice in the industry. Critics say this video has a political message and is pushing a conservative agenda on its viewers. 30 Sinclair-owned stations are CBS affiliates, and now the Justice Department is reviewing Sinclair's deal to buy a rival company. Paula Reid is in Washington with more.
Sinclair Broadcast Group runs local TV news stations that are seen in about 4 out of 10 American households. They're also trying to acquire Tribune stations that would allow them to be seen in even more homes. But it's a video of their anchors that has many people, including the president, talking and, of course, tweeting.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
In a now viral video, anchors from Sinclair news stations read the same promotional script denouncing so-called false news.
Some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
One false story after another.
The message seems to echo President Trump's criticism of news coverage.
We are not going to let the fake news tell us what to do.
The owners of Sinclair Broadcast Group have donated thousands to Republican causes, including a super PAC supporting Mr. Trump's 2016 presidential bid.
Obamacare is not presently sustainable.
Last year, the company hired former Trump White House staff member Boris Epstein as its chief political analyst.
I want to talk to you about my job.
Sinclair stations are required to carry Epstein's segments, including this one where he defends his role.
Wouldn't you want someone talking to you about politics only if you had actually worked in politics?
On Twitter, President Trump called Sinclair far superior to other media companies and mocked those who criticized Sinclair for being biased. His comments raised questions about White House impartiality as the Justice Department and the FCC review Sinclair's attempted acquisition of Tribune Media. If approved, the deal would increase Sinclair's reach to around 72% of American households.
This merger is going to go through.
Andrew Schwartzman is a professor at Georgetown University Law Center.
We're going to wind up with a handful of large companies owning much of the broadcasting industry with much less diversity and much less localism.
This is similar to AT&T's proposed acquisition of Time Warner. The president has frequently bashed Time Warner Properties, CNN, and the Trump Justice Department is trying to block that deal. But the judge, who is currently overseeing the case that will decide whether or not that deal can go through, has not really allowed the president's influence to be examined during the trial. Vlad?
Paula Reid, thanks so much. All right, for more on this, let's bring in Paul Farhi. He's a media reporter for The Washington Post. Good to see you, Paul.
Good morning, Vlad.
So you wrote a story about this when it first broke, saying one Sinclair station in Washington said it was, quote, disgusted by the memo. What other reaction are you hearing from these other stations?
Well, it depends on who you ask. The journalists in the various stations are disappointed, to say the least. They feel that this has, in some ways, stepped on their toes and taken out of their autonomy by handing it back off to corporate. Viewers are not happy. They've bombarded the stations with emails and calls saying, I won't watch you again. I'm going to boycott your advertisers. So there's been a lot of pushback. It's been quite a PR black eye for Sinclair.
Yeah, and a lot of people may not understand how this business works when it comes to some of these things. First of all, perhaps you can explain to our viewers, did these stations, did they have to air this piece, the words that the anchors were saying? Was that a mandate, or could they have rejected it?
Yeah, it was a must run. This is news industry speak for mandatory carriage. They were ordered by headquarters in Baltimore to air these spots using the local anchors of the stations. Now, what's interesting there is Sinclair had done a campaign like this last year. They simply used one of their corporate executives to do it. This time, they did the same thing using the local anchors, which was a big change because, one, the stations had to produce it, but it was also an attempt, I think, to use the credibility and the goodwill that those anchors had with their viewers in the local markets. So it was quite a different strategy this time around.
And that's an important point, because I've seen a lot of people on social media saying, well, we're journalists. You and I are journalists. These anchors are journalists. We can not do what is being asked of us. But explain again for our viewers the intricacies of some of these local markets, the contracts that anchors and reporters have, and how difficult it is for them to do what some people are suggesting.
Well, they really didn't have a choice in the matter. They are employees of the stations. They take orders like all employees do. Some of them have been on record saying that they didn't like doing it, but according to their contract, they were required to. It's not unusual in some ways for anchors to be asked to read a spot, promoting an upcoming news special or a program on the network. That's not the unusual thing. What's unusual about this is they were all asked to read from the same script, so it became a mandatory, promotional campaign that everyone had to do using the same words identically.
So there's been a memo from Sinclair executives, and this is from your piece. You write that the company's critics were, quote, upset about our well-researched journalistic initiative focused on fair and objective reporting. What's your take on that?
Well, I think one of the reactions within the Sinclair stations from the anchors is you are asking us to disrespect our professional colleagues at other stations and other media organizations and to basically say they are promoting false stories. I don't think the anchors, the reporters, the journalists at those stations really do feel that way. I think corporate feels that way, and this was corporate ordering the anchors to promote something that they felt wasn't necessarily true. The other aspect of this is it echoes some of the rhetoric of President Trump himself, and they felt that that was politicizing the news and drawing them into a fight that they didn't really want to be part of. The third aspect of this, I think, is also that local news is supposed to be local. When you saw the viral video of this, you realize that it's not so local, that a number of stations owned by one corporate owner can impose a template on all of them, and that removes the independence of the local stations.
Yeah, and you mentioned President Trump. He's tweeted about Sinclair a couple of times. He called it a superior organization. He's lambasted what he calls the fakers at CNN, NBC, ABC, and here at CBS, that we've done so much dishonest reporting. He gets into a press conference with presidents from Baltic countries and tells them not to call on American media to call because we're fake news. Clearly, the reason the president is out there tweeting his support for Sinclair Broadcasting is because presumably the owners of that organization are sympathetic to his presidency.
Yes, that's true, but there's also something else going on. Sinclair is on the verge of seeking federal approval for a very big takeover of another station owner called Tribune Media, and Sinclair needs the Federal Communications Commission. It needs the Department of Justice to approve that merger, and it needs the support of President Trump to signal to his agencies that this merger is acceptable. And so there's a kind of hand-in-glove kind of relationship here. You scratch our back, we'll scratch your back. And there's a suspicion that Sinclair is playing to the Trump administration for approval of this big merger they're seeking.
Yeah, and we just put up a graphic there that show that if this merger goes through, they would be in 72% of homes across this country. Is that at all problematic?
Well, considering that it's clear that Sinclair wants to impose its own corporate control over those formerly local stations, yes, I think the critics would say it is problematic. You are now giving one entity the opportunity to address almost 3/4 of the country at once, and having shown themselves to be partisan, to be conservative, to be pro-Trump, that looks like they're tilting in one direction. I'd say the same thing if they were tilting in the direction of a liberal or Democratic administration. The news is supposed to be impartial. When a company puts its thumb on the scale, as Sinclair has done at times, tilting in favor of one particular party or candidate, that's what's problematic.
And finally, Paul, I've also seen pushback from Sinclair executives suggesting that a lot of the anger about what they're attempting to do comes from this mandatory spot, this commentary, political commentary that's delivered by Boris Epshteyn. He is a close confidant of President Trump's, was part of the campaign. And they've suggested that, look, it's no different when mainstream news organizations or large news organizations hire former political operatives. For example, specifically, they mentioned George Stephanopoulos at ABC. But explain why what somebody like Mr. Stephanopoulos does is different from what Mr. Epshteyn is doing every week.
Sure, and Boris is upfront about this. He is a political analyst and commentator. He does about 9 spots a week. They are overtly political from his perspective. That's his right. That's his opinion. What George Stephanopoulos does, or tries to do, is to be an impartial anchorman. Now, you can argue about whether he is or he isn't, but that's his role, is to basically, give every side to the story and give everyone a fair shake. Boris has no such obligation. He's clearly doing commentary from his perspective.
Paul Farhi of the Washington Post, always great to have you to help break this down for us. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.